personally affected by the glass ceiling phenomenon?
I would say that I'm not necessarily personally affected at this point. I think it's hard to actually know when you have hit a glass ceiling, for example. I'm relatively early in my career, and so I think I have not necessarily personally encountered it in my own work, in part because I'm a lecturer, right? And so in academia, a lot of the glass ceiling that you would face actually in academia would be more so at the administrative levels and as you sort of apply for tenure and promotion and so forth. And so I think that that's the kind of issue where I could face it down the road, but I haven't faced it as of yet.
Okay. And given that women still make 76 cents to the dollar of every man,
Right.
What steps do you think society still needs to take in order for women to be respected as equal employees in the workplace?
Right. Well, I would say that there are two really big, huge things that need to happen. I think first of all, there needs to be more work at the sort of federal legislative and also sort of executive levels to really push on the issue from sort of powers that be, I guess, to say this is a really big issue. The other side of that, and I think that's already been done in terms of passing Lilly Ledbetter and signing that, but Lilly Ledbetter doesn't actually require equal pay. It just allows women and other folks who have been discriminated in pay gap situations, to sue with a larger time frame, so it actually changes the sort of statutes of limitations. So it's unfortunate. I mean, it was a huge win for women and other folks who are not paid equally and who suffer from sort of pay discrimination. But that's a really important first step. I think there needs to be an Equal Pay Act that actually needs to get sort of passed. Okay, so that's like the first step. The second step is actually in terms of, one of the nice things about state employees and federal employees is that that information about their pay scales are actually made public. And I think that one of the ways that employers can make that, they can sort of intervene in the situation about the pay gap and sort of the increasing pay gap is to make pay scales and pay sort of step grades and so forth public information. I think that would be a really important step. Now, I don't really know legally if that would be something that people could actually do as a private company, but I think that would be to be open, right, about the fact that here are our basic scale, pay grades for these different areas, rather than being all secretive. I think the sort of culture of secrecy around what people get paid leads to this additional pay discrimination, because there are these ways that women aren't necessarily socialized to really fight for what they're worth. And so that's sort of another third level, I guess, if you can think about it, for training young women and girls to negotiate terms, right? To negotiate for money and negotiate for what they're worth. So I think that there are sort of three levels. That sort of large legislative level. And then you have sort of the level of making the pay grades public, or at least public knowledge within the space of a company, and then the sort of tertiary level, which would be socialization, sort of how we teach young women and young girls to negotiate. How we teach young women and young girls to negotiate.
Awesome, thank you. How do you think that managers or executives can work to expose the glass ceiling effect within companies or organizations?
Yeah.
Might be one of the hardest questions.
Yeah, it's a really hard question because I think, it's hard because a lot of us, at least in the U.S. context, and also in the international context, but in the U.S. context in particular, there are still people in those positions that still, because we're socialized in terms of gender in many of the same kinds of ways culturally, there are still so many assumptions and sort of invisible modes that glass ceiling effect sort of happens. So, for example, informal networks of mentoring, sort of a lack of female mentors, or sort of an expectation that whoever's going to be the manager is
believe this phenomenon affects women emotionally or psychologically?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the way that the double bind works is that women are continually needing to manage, right? I want to be incredibly competent, but I have to manage how people perceive me as appropriately feminine. And so I think that that can actually take a huge toll on women. I think it also takes a huge toll on women who may want to build a family or may not want to build a family, and sort of the assumptions that are placed on them as well. The other thing that I think faces women when they're trying to advance in a career is that they often take on too much, and they criticize themselves too much, and I think because of that it can really be sort of detrimental. And the fact that they don't always recognize or may not recognize that the people that are making decisions about hiring and promotion may be looking at everything that they've done, right, on their resume, like, okay, on paper, there's this, and yet, I think women don't necessarily take into consideration the ways in which, the way that their executive has been sort of managing stereotypes in their mind about what's appropriately feminine or not, can actually get in the way without them doing anything, right? So this is a way that I think is like the idea of the glass ceiling is sort of continually bashing your head sort of against that ceiling, being like, I want to get through, but something is holding me back, and it's sort of a systematic level issue that women are, they're coming up against, and finding that their progress or their sort of advancement is limited. So of course, I would imagine that would be really frustrating emotionally as well, right?
I agree, for sure. So what advice would you give young women who may encounter this issue in their professional careers one day?
Okay, so I think it's really important that you're doing this project, in part because a lot of people, women in particular, do not think that the glass ceiling still exists, right? It's sort of like, oh, we're all equal, kumbaya, it's so great. And then you get out into the workplace and you realize, why is it so hard? Or why is it that I'm facing these sort of extra assumptions that I have to face, that I have to overcome these assumptions for people to actually take me seriously? Or why am I not being taken seriously? And so on the one hand, I just want to sort of use this opportunity, this question as an opportunity to bracket and say, I'm really glad that you're doing this project because this is a really important issue. My piece of advice, a couple